Not to praise Trump personally, Russian propagandists have received new instructions from the Kremlin on how to talk about US President Donald Trump. The reason for this shift is the ongoing negotiations between the US and Russia. Unlike previous American presidents, radical criticism of Trump is now off limits. According to the Verstka media, citing sources close to the Putin administration, propagandists have not received strict directives to present the supposed warming of US-Russia relations in a particular way. However, they have been ordered to maintain a so-called balance in their reporting as the negotiations could ultimately stall.
An employee of a major state media outlet described the new content policy as follows: "We don't make promises about the end of the special military operation. We don't give any deadlines. The main thing is that they have made contact, and we are ready to listen." An insider working for the state TV channel said that there are no instructions to force anything. It is only necessary to balance Trump with statements from the Russian side. From the Verstka article.
Every authoritarian regime needs an external enemy. For Russia, this enemy has always been the West, and now specifically Europe. During a recent meeting between US President and French President Emmanuel Macron discussed the possibility of NATO spending troops to Ukraine. In response, Russian propaganda outlets launched a wave of insults directed at Macron. However, experts believe that the Kremlin's temporary thaw towards the US will not last long.
They are not rushing to embrace Trump, fully understanding that today things are one way, and tomorrow they may be completely different. The general directive is to leave Americans alone for now, focus on the British, the French, the Germans, but don't touch the Americans. During Trump's first presidency, Margarita Simonian once declared she would drive around Moscow waving an American flag in celebration. However, even back then, Trump's presidency did not turn out well for Russian propagandists.
After Macron and Trump's negotiations, Putin immediately gave an interview to Russian media. The Russian dictator claimed that Russia supposedly has more resources than Ukraine. Russia decided to become a raw materials supplier to the United States after propagandists mocked the negotiation process between the United States and Ukraine on rare earth metals. In this agreement, Putin seems to have seen prospects for major deals with the US.
People are confused. The blatant sale of rare earth metals and the possibility of handing them over to the U.S., it's too much. Some pro-Kremlin bloggers support it, others don't. Many still don't grasp what's happening. But the overall reaction is delayed because, historically, no American president has ever truly benefited Russia.
Russian propaganda is now contradicting itself and falling apart. The objectives of the so-called special military operation are increasingly unclear, putting pro-war mobilization efforts at risk. Since the full-scale invasion of Ukraine and the imposition of Western sanctions, Russian media has insisted that domestic production could replace Western goods. Sanctions have included bans on Russian oil and petroleum imports, asset freezes for major Russian companies, financial restrictions and export bans on technology and dual-use goods. As a result, Russia now lacks airplane components, military equipment repair is idle, and losses from sanctions are at all-time high. In 2024, the budget deficit in Russia amounted to 3.5 billion rubles.
Russia's economic situation is dire. The so-called lifeline Trump is throwing may well turn into an anchor. We no longer understand the logic, why this war was fought for 3 years, why 350,000 men were mobilized and sent to the trenches, why over 1 million signed military contracts, why there are hundreds of thousands of dead, wounded, and missing, and why millions have become refugees.
According to Bloomberg, Putin's special representative for foreign economic cooperation Kirill Dmitriev is using business proposals to pressure the US into a deal favorable to the Kremlin. The goal is to lift sanctions on Russia. Dmitriev proposed that Putin sell around 2 million tons of Siberian aluminium to the US in exchange for Trump lifting import restrictions. He also suggested that Russian companies could set up joint ventures with American firms for aluminium production. Reported by Sergei Kulias, Victoria Smirnova, UATV News. Drone attack on Ufa oil refinery. At first, Ufa residents reported a powerful explosion in the city. Later, firefighters confirmed that a fire had broken out at the refinery, but did not give the cause. Ufa is one of the largest oil refining centers in Russia. In terms of total refining volumes, the Bashkortostan region is among the top 5 oil refining centers in the country. The Ufa oil refinery is located about 1,400 kilometers from Ukraine. Canada has announced new sanctions against Russia. This was said by Canadian Prime Minister Justin Trudeau during a summit in London. The sanctions have been expanded against 10 individuals and 21 entities, including paramilitary organizations and their leaders, to help counter Russia's use of third-party organizations and countries to advance its political and military goals in Ukraine. To date, Canada has imposed sanctions against more than 3,000 individuals and entities involved in Russian aggression. US President Donald Trump will hold a meeting on Monday with representatives of his administration responsible for defense and security, dedicated to policy towards Ukraine. This is reported by the New York Times, citing an unnamed administration representative. Meeting will be attended in particular by Secretary of State Marco Rubio and Secretary of Defense Pete Hegseth. According to the publication, the cancellation of military aid to Ukraine, including the supply of ammunition and equipment approved due the Joe Biden administration, will be discussed.
France, the UK, Germany and other European nations are prepared to send troops to ensure a potential ceasefire between Russia and Ukraine. This was stated by French Finance Minister Eric Lombard, who also noted that European forces would require US support.
There is a general agreement that in order to guarantee the ceasefire, it will be necessary to have European troops in Ukraine, and UK, Germany and France are already willing to do that, but other member states of the European Union will contribute as well. Those troops will arrive after the ceasefire in order to guarantee that ceasefire is respected. But if we want this ceasefire to be respected, we need a US backup, and I believe that Americans are agree to do that.
Lombard made this statement following French President Emmanuel Macron's visit to the United States, where he held talks with his American counterpart Donald Trump. Among the topics discussed was the potential deployment of European peacekeeping forces to Ukraine. According to Macron, dozens of EU and NATO countries are willing to contribute troops.
We want peace. This peace must not mean a surrender of Ukraine. It must not mean a ceasefire without guarantees. This peace must allow for Ukrainian sovereignty and allow Ukraine to negotiate with other stakeholders regarding the issues that affects it rather. And this is a peace in which we must commit to maintaining long-term security and stability for Ukraine and the entire region. Emmanuel Macron, President of France.
Paris has assured that the US President does not oppose the potential deployment of European forces to Ukraine. Donald Trump himself emphasized that any Western peacekeeping mission should be acceptable to all.
Something will be done that's going to be satisfactory to everybody. It's actually something I did discuss. A form of peacekeeping that's acceptable to everybody. Ultimately, we'll be able to agree on something, I'm sure. Donald Trump, President of the United States.
Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky has also acknowledged growing support for the idea. He confirmed that 8 countries have already expressed willingness to send troops.
I am pleased that a group of 8 countries has joined this initiative with a positive outlook. These are the Nordic and Baltic nations. We had a meeting in Kyiv, and I believe this is very important. It depends on the role that the United States will play in all of this, which will determine the number of countries involved, the size of the personnel, and who will be able to contribute or provide guarantees, as this is part of the security guarantees framework.
However, there are ongoing discussions about the necessary size of the peacekeeping force. According to the Ukrainian Parliament's Defense Committee, the 30,000 foreign troops proposed by Emmanuel Macron would not be sufficient. People's Deputy and Secretary of the Parliamentary Committee on National Security, Defense and Intelligence, Roman Kostenko, emphasized that beyond troops' numbers, their potential deployment location, whether inside Ukraine or along the boundary lines, will play a key role in ensuring security. Reported by Katerina Bastun, Valeria Nikipelova, UATV News.